a lot of you are already familiar with David Weigel, our speaker here today. The main reason his work is must read in Congress and in the White House is because he's often doing the work outside of DC and weighing the political futures of candidates and parties in the process. And with the Trump Republican Party now in power, David is dug in not only to look at, how firm that support is, but also what Democrats are doing to position themselves to respond. You probably saw his work in Wisconsin, sort of gauging what was happening with the Supreme Court race there, and he's written extensively about what happened in Florida. David is a founding reporter at Semafor, where he writes the Americana newsletter. He's been on the campaign trail for nearly 20 years. Is that fair?
That's fair, yeah. It is, if I do the math. I'm not afraid of the math. It's great. It's great to remember campaigns before iPhones when I had to print maps out, yeah.
He's covering elections, Congress, and political movements for the Washington Post, Bloomberg, Slate, and Reason. He's also written for Rolling Stone, the American Prospect, the American Conservative, and the Washington City Paper. And in 2017, he published The Show That Never Ends, a history of progressive rock music. He's a 2004 graduate of Northwestern University and a Medill School of Journalism grad. Please welcome David Weigel.
Yes, good to be back.
And we also owe him a big debt of gratitude for responding quickly, given what's been happening at the White House and how our program has changed. So a special thanks to him.
And I was here before the inauguration, but this is a new group of folks mostly. Okay, good.
We welcome them in January 2025.
Okay, good. Because I didn't recognize anyone. Now it's not my fault anymore. Okay, good. I'm more interested in the questions. The setup was very good. Did you want to? How did you want to do it?
What I'd like to do, I guess, is talk about, given the bomb that was dropped yesterday, how firm the support continues to be within the party. We saw some, I don't want to say defections, but people who were not in lockstep as everybody has always been. Perhaps maybe a discussion of what the tipping point looks like, if there is, in this party, in this administration, and also from your work outside of DC, which I find really meaningful and consequential. What the Democrats are doing. Is there a strategy, and how important was what happened in Wisconsin to kind of either the midterms or further down the road?
Yeah, I can start with Wisconsin, even though it happened last in the list that it happened furthest in the past in the list that you're talking about.
Seems like
there's always fighting about whether special elections can be referenda. This wasn't special. This was an off-year municipal election where turnout is never as high as it's in a presidential, no matter what people do. And it's not a persuasion election. It is, unless something happens with one of the candidates, it is how much of our base can we turn out. So the race was going to be competitive. Before Elon Musk got involved, Turning Point Action, other allies of the president were in Wisconsin with a strategy of finding Trump voters, finding at least 200,000 Trump voters who would usually skip these things, and turning this into a referendum on Trump. If you support the president, you want to stop the radical left, turn out in this. They spent a ton of money and brought surrogates to the state. We're sending mail to voters, Republican voters, just saying support Trump by voting for Brad Schimmel, the Republican nominee. Schimmel was very open about that too. We'll have so many topics not to get too in the race, but the seal had already broken on whether to polarize and make a partisan election out of a judicial election. That was already happening. There's a weird minuet going on where the candidates don't say they're Republican, don't say they're Democratic, but make it clear what values they have, what party they're aligned with. And then Elon got involved at the end of the end of February, spending money through America PAC, and Democrats in the state started a People versus Musk messaging campaign that said this election is now in large part about DOGE and about whether the richest man in the world is allowed to buy this election. I'm repeating their messaging, but he is the richest man in the world, so it wasn't fallacious. And the Republican theory remained until Tuesday evening, really. We think by Elon bringing attention to this, by him spending money, by all these groups being involved, we've done enough to turn this into the referendum that we can win. And they didn't. They actually hit their turnout goal. They found 230,000 more voters than they gotten for the last Supreme Court race. But Democrats who'd won that race decisively found 280,000 more of their voters. To the extent, this isn't surprising anymore, that Elon was replying to an Alex Jones post the day after about how it might have been stolen because the numbers don't add up. They added up. That was what I saw in Wisconsin, that both bases were very excited, but Democrats were terrified, and Democrats also were taking advantage of every news cycle because I'm ripping off, I think it was Chris Hayes' insight, and Ezra Klein's putting it to it too, and it's not their insight. I'm sure someone put this in an academic paper first. But the commodity is in politics and everything now is attention. It's can you buy attention? Can you get free attention? Musk is very good at getting free attention, and news in Wisconsin, which is hitting people differently. There's some communities that don't have local news. News was generally about what the administration was doing, was about layoffs and how they might affect your community. And that was negative. That actually was a very negative political climate for Republicans in April of a new presidency, which is very early for there to be a political backlash. At this point, in the Obama years, they were still able to hold special elections. At this point in the first Trump term, their vote was going down, but they were winning everything. So this was a setback. We can, if we want to talk to the Florida race, that was different. The tariffs roll into that because this election did show that, one, the MAGA vote who came out for Donald Trump, which contains multitudes, it's people who are obsessed with him and no other politician, it's also people who remember his presidency fondly, cannot be motivated the way that Democrats can be motivated now for lots of reasons. They pay less attention to news cycles, they are less educated, which I'm not saying in a pejorative way, but that there's a different commitment to voting in every election based on how educated you are, how much attention you pay to news. We all know that. It used to be a neutral or pro-Republican bias, and now it's a Democratic bias. And these tariffs, as they come down, come in a climate where we see that there are a lot of people who took a chance on Trump that are not terribly happy right now with how he's acting. They're happy on immigration. They're not happy on the economy because Trump had really an argument that was hard for Democrats to penetrate. They did warn that he was going to raise tariffs that equaled what Kamala Harris called a Trump tax. That was not very credible for the voters they were trying to mostly convert back. And you found talking to Democrats in the campaign, a lot of working class voters who were taking a chance on Trump did not believe he was going to raise prices. They remembered that he kept prices low, and they remembered that he sent out stimulus checks. And this is the reason that Democrats, even though ideologically many of them like the idea of tariffs, not the way these are being done, but they support tariffs in some instances. I've found this talking to Democrats this week. They don't support this, and they're confident they won't support this for the short-term reason that they think the country is not actually happy with Trump's economic management. They thought it would be, a lot of voters thought it would be a turn of the dial back to policies that made things cheaper in 2019, and they're not getting that. And as long as they're not getting that, a lot of those people are not bought in for, let's say, a 2 or 3 year transition where more manufacturing is going to come to America, or more textile are going to be made here, more Build America companies are going to benefit. They were waiting for prices to get lower quickly. Will mortgage rates go down? Potentially. This affected that, I think. Positive in the short term. Will interest rates come down? Actually, the paradox is that the job growth is strong enough that the Fed's probably not going to cut rates very quickly, or it's not going to cut it 4 times this year. So I wouldn't say the wind is at their back. They're still very unpopular. But as the party of we would not let Trump get away with everything he's doing, they feel very confident right now, and they also have tools that they can run on. For example, and you mentioned, last thing I'll say, you mentioned some of the Republicans joining them this week. An argument they can make is if we get Congress, we can actually take some of the power away, his ability to without any input from from the legislature, put tariffs on people and declare emergencies. What they're trying to do in Congress right now is pull back this Canadian emergency, which we can get into. It is. I'm not convinced that a lot of fentanyl dealers were paying tariffs. When, not that I've smuggled much, but when I did take back some unpasteurized cheese from Quebec, I didn't tell customs, actually, you should probably tax me on this cheese I'm bringing from Canada. Probably the same with fentanyl. But the premise of this emergency, I think Democrats are also very comfortable saying, this is bogus. Let's go to these Midwestern states that are trading with Canada and all these countries that are affected, and let's weaken the Republicans' connection to Trump because he's not doing what those crucial voters thought he would do.
What happens faster, though? Do the Republicans get traction, or do the Republicans abandon him in this way? Where do you see, the most change or the quickest change happening?
Well, there is this discourse this week that I mostly ignored about, and this I think will keep happening because it's a very good way to place op-eds. Whether he'll run for president again, he won't. It is J.D. Vance set up to replace him. He is a lame duck president who, some people dispute, can you say lame duck if he hasn't lost Congress? He's a president who does not have to worry about his next election. That was always the bet. It was, this will be different. I don't have to listen to the same advisors. I'm going to have people who do what I do, and I can lock in on policy without bending because I don't need to worry how it's going to affect my vote in Wisconsin in 3 years. Mm-hmm. Does he care about how this affects Tom Tillis in North Carolina? Probably not, the way that he interacts with these guys. I don't think right now that a lot of Republicans are going to say the thing I should do is buck Trump on this. The only one I've seen today on anything do that was Don Bacon from Omaha, who's one of the 3 Republicans in a seat that Trump did not win. Kamala Harris won his seat in Omaha and a couple suburbs, criticizing the firings at the NSC, which is a different story we didn't mention, but I feel people know what it is. On who voted with Trump, with Democrats, I should say, with Tim Kaine on the Canada resolution, it was Mitch McConnell, who's retiring. It's Susan Collins, who is in a blue state and votes with Democrats on things. It's Rand Paul, who is attitudinally against tariffs. It's Lisa Murkowski, who, none of that's surprising. There's not any, you have seen more, for example, look at John Cornyn. When I was thinking of Republicans going along with the idea that we need to declare this emergency to stop fentanyl, Cornyn is one of the guys saying that. Cornyn's biggest threat to re-election right now is whether Ken Paxton runs against him. So yeah, the same politics are still there, where Republicans are more worried they defy Trump and somebody says, I wouldn't defy Trump if I got there. And even though he's going to be out of office in 2029, that's still the driver for all this. Because when I talk about Trump voters, I keep trying to distinguish. There are the people who are going to vote in these Republican primaries. That is a subset, a small subset of the electorate. The ones who took a chance on Trump and won't come back for anybody else, well, I just described what they're going to do. The ones who matter in the Republican primary, there is not a way that they have found to, let's say, reconvert 100,000 or so people who left the party under Trump and started voting for Nikki Haley and then bailed and voted for Kamala Harris. Those people are just not relevant in the primary. So I don't think the Republican politics have changed. Not right now. How
much of what you're relating here, because there's always this tension for people who are reporters, who are based in Washington and have little opportunity or access to get out of D.C. Mm-hmm. How much of what you know or you're learning comes from outside rather than inside?
Well, that's where the
and how do you make the case to your editors? Say, hey, maybe you don't have to do this, but just say, hey, I need to go X because because I know I can get to somebody who can clarify or provide, some insight that I'm not getting anywhere else.
Right. I do pitch it. I don't just say, let me go take a wild swing at this place where I might have a story. I pitched it around the fact that their selection was happening and I could get people to talk to me in Wisconsin. When in the first Trump term, there were a lot of stories that felt like they were blowing up in the D.C. news climate, and then I would get I remember one in Minnesota that was premised on our people are angry at the tariffs in ag communities, and I went to, I think what was Tim Walz's district. He's running for governor at the time, and yeah, that was helpful. I was finding there were people in the farm bureau who were angry, and average people were not that worried. They'd been where he's trying something new. We've never heard this before. So can you manufacture that by not going to these places? No. Tenure, knowing people in these states that I can check in with is very helpful. Skepticism of some of the polling, because a lot of issue groups are going to put out polling that says this is already unpopular. That's pretty helpful. I think it's just if you can't get out there, and even if you can get out there to buttress what you're doing, talking to people who are not necessarily political actors, who do not care which party wins, but are making long-term investments or advising people on what to invest in based on what they think the economy is going to look like. They're more relevant. So the people I talked to in the Farm Bureau last time would have been helpful. And I've seen local news reporting, which I always try to survey when I'm writing, where local news was finding people in where did I see it? Like Buffalo and Cleveland, who their first reaction to the Trump tariffs was, "This is awesome. We want something to be done so that people are buying more products in America." That's pretty helpful. That's something I think you can do without leaving DC, of just find some way to stress test whether what everyone's freaking out about is real. But that's a long answer. Like not everything. I think you can do this without necessarily going to these states to find it. If you're at a news organization that will say, please go to the Michigan suburbs and find out if people are angry about this. That is an asset, but you can do it without it. You just have to go through people who are not they're not worried about polling. They don't even care about polling. They're just going to say, how is this affecting what I'm ordering this year?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, on the way over here, I was seeing like Nintendo announcing it's going to delay pre-orders of the Switches. That's a story you don't need to travel for to see the consumer side of this. People whose main decisions are not going to change, but we're not even thinking about tariffs until that. There are all kinds of angles. I think there's a billion things you can write about, like becoming familiar with an industry without actually going to the factory. You can do it. It takes some stop and starting and maybe failing and not figuring out who to talk to who's not just a lobbyist.
I'll ask one more question.
Sure.
I'll open up to you all, but I guess in order to track what you're tracking, you've got to be reading quite a bit and also looking at news organizations, regional news organizations around the country. We have a few of them here, but who out there is still doing a good job that you're learning the most from, and what is it that they're doing that keeps you coming back to use them as a sounding board?
By and large, regional news, regional local news, and regional papers that have not been hollowed out, which is less every year, are good. National Wall Street Journal, I find, always has consumer first reporters who are out there finding stuff I would not know because their beat is not normally politics. I would say that and Bloomberg, honestly, of the national. And no, like without any disparagement to the Times and the Post, the people who cover the same things, but I think of the people who they cover politics, but their priority is the economy and their priority is what moves markets. Generally, have been saying, okay, they know without kind of the work I have to do, who is this going to affect? Oh, they're affecting vanilla exports from Madagascar. Well, I know who's going to be struggling with that in America, and I don't, but usually the consumer reporters of those places do. The local stuff is, I found people have jumped on it right away. It is a fascinating story. How is this going to affect us? How is this decision for DC going to affect us? Is a good story. It's not one that happens with like the NAC, for example, or Cory Booker's filibuster. I do separate the stories that are for people who pay attention to politics, who at this point are more Democratic than not, versus does this mean I have to move some investments? Those people.
Yeah, and I guess I asked that question because there are many issues that are on a slow burn right now. Maybe not a slow burn. Maybe they're in fully engulfed. Tariffs, one issue, cost of living, which is associated with that. But how do you do you sense, given the travel that you're doing and always doing, that that is fully engulfed now, or are people running behind, or are they on whether or not those issues are beginning to matter?
Well, I got back from Wisconsin before the tariff announcements, but the Canadian back and forth, threatening new tariffs, pulling them back, et cetera, how Prime Minister Carney was reacting, that was actually something that people had takes on. On the rest of it, not I want to make sure I'm separating. When you talk about this, I'm separating what most people care about, because everything I cover ends up being, and then how does this affect the vote, which 60-some% of people who can participate are going to participate in, and it's so early that usually this time of a presidency, people are not paying that close attention. There is usually a honeymoon, which is actually pretty truncated for Trump this time. I don't want to be super generic about it, but I'd say the trades issue was already so interesting to people for the reason I was saying before. This is new. How does it affect me? The other stuff, not as much. Just the DOGE layoffs were in the news again from the perspective of, or with the angle of, they're shutting these VA. They're laying off people at the VA. Did they lay them off at the clinic that is used here? Well, we know who to talk to at the clinic. They shrinking the Department of Education shrinkage, or I don't know what to call it even yet, had just happened when I was there, and that was in the discourse too. That was in the news. Now, obviously, it was hitting Madison different than it was other parts of the state, but I was struck when I was another thing important at political events important to do is always pay attention to what people are not saying. And I was not hearing specifics at Republican events about the great DOGE things that had happened that were amazing that we all love. Not even they got rid of USAID and that's amazing. It was just they're finding fraud. It's often boiled down to they're finding waste and fraud, and we're not wasting your tax dollars anymore. But then it would move on to other things that were more motivating to Republicans, and they're trying to stop Trump and they're trying to stop his agenda. But for most people who are not, again, news junkies, it was really this thing I just heard. How is this going to affect how is this affecting my school? The answer sometimes was, oh, it doesn't. Yeah, you have to worry about it. I have not seen that much impact journalism, for example, on. So the Biden administration was putting conditions on through ed mostly on inclusive gender policies in schools, and the Trump administration obviously has gone really hard in the opposite direction. But that's not a story that usually comes up unless there's a clash. Oh, there were people protesting. Oh, a student was affected, etc. But that's what I kind of expect. I expect a lot of those. I was struck in Wisconsin though how that was already happening. You knew new thing just happened. It means here's the number of the dollars that was cut from the program. How is that going to affect us? We're finding out. And often they didn't know yet. I mean, often the local news interview was, here's an expert from the university talking about it. Here's a Republican talking about it. They were not there yet. So it needs to actually interact with people in a real way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Open it up. Let me grab a mic. Oh. Yeah, you can go.
Oh, sorry. Hi, my name's Hannah Demasay. I work for ABC News. So I cover the White House.
Yeah.
So I just want to kind of get like a fine point on it. Do
Yeah,
you
sure.
think what you were seeing in Wisconsin, like the coverage around people talking about tariffs and people talking about tariffs and DOGE and the federal cuts. Do you think news outlets, especially at the national level, were actually reflecting what you were hearing in the state? I'm just curious, you talk about some of the outlets you were referring to, Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. I'm just curious, do you think national levels have actually captured how people are feeling about this, especially in a battleground state?
Well, I was trying to distinguish, I can be finer about it, between national security stories or personnel stories that are really interesting and important. You need to know who actually is running things. Versus how are these things affecting people back there? I guess every year, but every 4 years, there's just less interest by conservatives in media coverage of what a Republican administration is doing. They just assume that there's a big heuristic already built. If the media is covering this negative thing, it's because they want them to fail. They're lying about us. They want it to fail. So the signal story is important. Is it super relevant to people who are not Democratic partisans in swing states? I didn't think that it was. But that's not a reason not to write it. But that I didn't see. That the I didn't see that one break through. I didn't expect it to. It's important not to be cynical though and say let's not write this story because we're not going to find it. But again, the Elon and DOGE role, that was interesting because there was not a temperature check of what people thought of that until the Wisconsin election. And he really did lean into that and say this is a referendum. I think Elon made it pretty clear, but also Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, was at his Green Bay rally, Elon's Green Bay rally, and said this is a way to show the radical left that you don't mess with Trump, you don't mess with Elon, you don't mess with DOGE. That's pretty blunt. So, yeah, the things that were Trump political turmoil or the scheduling of whether things are passing in the House. Even this week, I wasn't out this week, but the thing that shut down the House for the week of proxy voting for new mothers, I don't think that's terribly important to most people. It really is what are the economic effects of these programs, and can Republicans defend them? Can they actually say this is why this is good and this is how we're going to benefit? That's what I mean. But I really not saying to be cynical. That's one of my bad traits is I'll say, well, this story's so big, no one's gonna care, and sometimes they do. But you find out through an election how uncomfortable are people talking about this. Again, that's usually the clue. Do candidates not want to bring this up? Do they say it's a distraction? Do they want to move on? Sometimes they say it's a distraction because people don't care, but they're always saying it because they want to pivot to one of the issues they polled says is much better for them.
My name's Sophie Hills. I write for the Christian Science Monitor. And my question's kind of more broadly about the question of trust and trust in the media and readership. And and push back if my assumptions here are wrong, but to me, the center for a long time has moved to the right. And I mean, the center politically. And some organizations and within the media, we have these discussions about trying to stay in the center. And my question is about do we follow the center? But increasingly in the last election, especially, there was so much coverage pointing out that many Americans don't actually feel particularly represented by either party. And it feels like a breakdown of kind of the two parties and institutions. And so when we're looking for stories, when we're framing stories, is it even possible to write for a wider audience? Sometimes it just feels like if you're writing a story about DOGE layoffs, it's going to be read by a narrow audience. I don't know if that makes sense, but how do you think about that in terms of staying as, I don't know.
I guess I'm optimistic on part of that is that just explaining what has happened with the layoff and what the program did is one useful and two can be. Is it going to appeal to every reader? No. But the stuff that I find people will tune out on is if the angle is how could this affect Donald Trump? Even if there's a protest outside, because one thing this administration has done, and they didn't invent it, but it's easier for them because of falling trust in the media, is just if there is a protest or if there is negative coverage in the media, it strengthens the resolve to not care about it. The fact that they were protests at USAID, they said, well, we wanted that to happen. Deporting college students foreign college students, not for violence, but they rode an op-ed that we didn't like. They want the negative attention, and I find the coverage that actually has picked up and people have read, regardless of what they think about it, is just the factual stuff. It's just okay, let's see what was in the sentencing document. Let's find the attorney and talk to him. Not that 5 million reporters can call the attorney, but that stuff, not the how does this affect politically. That's what I found. And I'm arguing against interest, is I write a lot about what the political impact of this will be. I mean, I was just, when I looked at my phone, just approving some newsletter stuff. And indeed, I make that point, and I was making that there are a lot of voters who expected Trump to lower prices, and he's not doing it. That's relevant. But it's more if there is a tuning out if the angle of the story is this going to lead to some political backlash? If it is, meet the people who are deported, meet the people who are being laid off. Those have, I think, broken through. Now there are people who are saying that's amazing. I love that they're laid off. The way that they might like reading 24 years ago Enron workers are laid off and crying. Oh, great! And like there are people who take, I think, kind of a sadistic glee in government workers being laid off. But that story definitely gets through. And I was seeing that people still want to know what is happening to these things. The ability to explain, like, well, what did USAID do? Has been really useful. Like the stories about these programs, some of them were through attorneys finding people affected by it. A lot of it was, we looked into the grants. Here's a story about what this grant was doing. And there are people who say that's a sob story. You don't want to read it. But that's been really illuminating for how the government spends money. What the theory of it all is. What's the follow up? Well, here's China moving in and trying to do some of it, or here's the private sector moving in and trying to do some of it. I think those have been traveling. Now they don't lead necessarily, but they're different outlets. There's like what leads on TV news often, especially if you watch Fox this week. It's diverted even more from what the daily goings on in the government are. It's been a lot of kind of culture war coverage of things that are happening but are not affecting people economically. That stuff goes through. The trust in institutions generally, I think, let's stipulate that there are a lot of people who stopped paying attention to media because they thought its coverage of COVID was hysterical and relied too much on experts saying things. And I don't know, I think you unring that bell, but I do. If the lesson there was that people start to lose faith in a media outlet or source if it says stuff they think is not true. If it's lying to them right now about tariffs and saying don't worry about it, and then the tariffs affect them, I think that's not going to be good for the very rah-rah partisan, don't worry, Trump's got this handled media. And like who in that climate who benefits? Like the people just like trying to tell the story. I think generally hitting more roadblocks, because you're gonna hit more roadblocks for trying to find a fired worker who wants to talk and wants to be in the media than you will a Republican or a Democratic operative. But that stuff has been breaking through. I do, and that was what I was seeing. That was people turning their heads to the TV or whatever when I was in Wisconsin. Was here is a human telling the story how they got affected.
Hey, David, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course.
Grant Schwab with the Detroit News, Washington correspondent based here. You touched on this a little bit already, but best you can in, I guess, a couple minutes. What's your guidebook or crash course to doing drop-in coverage?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that doesn't seem too parachutey.
Yeah.
And I mean nitty-gritty things like where are the places you like to go to first? What does your prep involve? How much of your 2-day itinerary or 3-day or whatever are you setting up in advance versus just going with the flow when you get there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and again, you have to just do it for a while in order, I think, to not. I always worry about looking like a parachute reporter. I worry less if it's Wisconsin. I've just been coming to for stories for 14 years. 15 years. So I know, but let's say right now I wanted to go there blind. The first part is really just a lot of tedious calling of people and finding out what the campaigns are doing and who has time to talk. Sometimes with America PAC, you often find they just don't want to tell you what they're doing necessarily. You find out from other people. But a lot of the calling of campaigns and getting a few things that, for what I do, you can see in person to some extent. So like the Brad Schimmel's campaign, the conservative judge, said, yes, we're not going to announce every event necessarily, but here's where you can go to talk to him. The Crawford campaign, this day she's pretty busy, but she has a block between phone calls, so you can talk to her in her office then. And then it was reading basically everything I could about the race and their records. Not even just the primary sources, but they're reporting on them because they both had pretty long careers in the state. Schimmel I'd known from Attorney General, and I knew reporters who had covered him. So, not saying give me your notes, just more. I often just ask people like, "Hey, I don't want to be like naive or like make a mistake that you see national people making. What should I know?" But I do that with friends I've had. It'd be tough for us cold calling somebody. I've had that where there was one I did in North Carolina years and years ago where I thought I did a fine or a fair job covering these weekly protests that were happening against the legislature, and I had like this. I made a couple of local media really angry because they felt like they weren't getting credit for what they'd done in that. And I had not cited them enough in doing it. Not that I was ripping them off. I just wasn't citing their reporting enough. But just that, there's no substitute for just reading a bunch and calling a bunch of people, and then you get there and you're more confident. For finding which places to go, Madison, we know how it's going to vote. I think it ended up being the city of Madison was 90-something% for the Democrat, and then the county around it was 77 to 78. And every time I would get okay, we can talk to you, we can meet this place in Madison, I would be not annoyed, but a little crestfallen. Like, can't we go somewhere where I'm a little less familiar with the territory? I do try to seek out places that are a little bit less. Not a little bit less predictable in their politics. I know less about. The final thing to say though is for just getting voices from voters on an election like this, the part of that is just finding a polling place that is not obviously. And you can go back and check. All right, let me go online. This polling place or this precinct, I should say, was 90% Harris last time, so that's not going to be very interesting. This one was 55%. Let me go and talk to people outside that one. And that's the other part, or the other glamorous part, is let me park outside this place because early voting is happening, and if I can talk to 5 people after asking 20 if they'll talk. Honestly, not to be too stereotypical, but Wisconsin's pretty good for this. Like, it's not one of the ruder states. People do like to talk about their participation in democracy. Then I feel better. It's like, okay, I'm here and I'm parachuted a little bit, but I'm trying to find people who do not have totally set mindsets on this. And I found TV people I knew who did come in just for 3 days or something at the very end. They did that and had really good luck doing it. They're pretty good at finding it. Shaq Brewster especially was doing something from NBC where he found a place that was in the Milwaukee suburbs, had trended a little bit Democratic in the last election. It was Republican, and he was finding people who said, yeah, I'm pissed off at Elon. I'm not necessarily a Democrat, and I voted for Scott Walker, but this is annoying. And just finding a couple of those got past the total stereotypical coverage of the state. Also, calling it a cheesehead. Every time a story would call it a cheese hat or a cheesehead hat, that was the signal that they were not paying attention. That was like the holding up 3 fingers instead of that. But that's part of it too. Is like reading it and saying let me not get this pronunciation wrong. I did hear one TV package that got the pronounced the name wrong of the Republican candidate, and I was like, that's the tell. You were only there for 2 days. You didn't even talk to him. Maybe nobody cares. But for me, it's I don't care if a journalist sees it. It's more, will a reader see this and just say that's not my state. That's a cartoon.
Right down.
Hi, this is Stephanie with Bloomberg News.
Hey.
My question for you is just based on all of your experience. It seems like you've been very, nose to the ground. You're really aware of all the politics across the U.S. I'm just curious if there's been any moment in the last couple of years that have surprised you, kind of similar to what you've said about the Wisconsin election, that really shaped your understanding of the electorate.
I'll probably think, when we're done, I'll probably think of one that totally shocked me, as opposed to I had a hunch and this said my hunch was a little bit right or wrong. One sticks in mind. I was carpooling with a colleague in 2016 primary, day of the primary, day before the primary in Ohio, I think day before, and we went to Mansfield, which is one of the cities that had been in decline for decades. And when we talked to voters, not only were they voting for Trump, but they were just extremely blunt that they were voting for him because nobody had ever been able to turn around their city. It was falling. It used to be so much better. They just had very detailed examples of how things had been in decline for a very long time. And yeah, John Kasich was on the ballot, but he hadn't fixed it. And that was one of the, okay, I get, I had gotten Trump's appeal before that, but really clear where his appeal was going to be if he was the nominee. And indeed, Ohio is one of those states that was competitive and fell off the map because that version of the pitch was so powerful. Yes, your town's screwed, and can you really trust Democrats after Barack Obama was president? He didn't fix it either. That one was very helpful. I'm surprised that it's this blunt, as opposed to I'm completely shocked that this happened. I'm trying to think of an example that's not Trump-centric exactly. With Harris, like anyone who covered Harris too had closely had this experience where they went to something where she should have done well, or even her own rally, and just if you talk to people on the way out, they would, if you prod a little bit, they were disappointed. They had thought she'd be more inspiring, and they thought she'd be more specific, and they weren't. And this was, black women who'd come to see her. The appeal of the campaign was, part of it was she could be the first black female president, and they weren't happy about it. And so that happened throughout her career. And there was one weekend before the election, 2024, in Philadelphia, where a group pitched me on its Philadelphia turnout program. And I went and spent a day with them, and you could just tell that people they thought were black voters in central Philadelphia. This is more west and central Philadelphia, who definitely had voted Democratic before. You could just tell from talking to them they were just not enthused by her, and they weren't saying, "Now I love Trump," but just a way that I remembered from covering Obama that was not there. That was much more, or covering Biden 2020, much more. We got to get Trump out of there. I could just feel that. I was surprised because they had invited me to see it, and I told them, you invited me to see a program that's working, but clearly you're finding people who are not excited. That was the surprise, was they really thought we're going to show this reporter a package of how this is working so well. Because I think a week before that was with Turning Point in Arizona, and their thing worked out great. They were finding Republicans who didn't usually vote early, and they were getting the vote early, and everything they said was going to happen happened. And when Democrats didn't, I said, "Oh, surprising, but this informs a lot." For a full, yeah. If I think of something at the end, that was a full-on shock. But I try to be completely shocked by things. That was one of my, my whole career, like going into things and saying, whatever my biases are, let me not be shocked if they're wrong. And Trump was actually hard in the beginning with that, because I would find him saying things I thought would offend a conservative audience that didn't. But after a while, I got used to that. And I can't think of the last one that truly shocked me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Karina Capabianco with Spectrum
Hey.
News. I work with our local TV stations in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and was wondering, if you've ever, gone to cover a campaign or a candidate, and maybe you get there, they don't want to talk to you, or the campaign's sort of giving you like a runaround. How do you deal with that?
Oh, yeah. Several times, and sometimes with other reporters having the same experience. Let me think of one example that was strange was in New York 2022. I wrote a story about first post-Dobbs special election, which was won by this guy, Pat Ryan. But the expectation was, it's a swing seat. The Republican who lost it last time is going to run in the special and he'll win. And the Democrat, I'd actually covered him in another race. He was super open to talk. Here's the schedule. He's going to be at this event with Schumer. He has time to talk in this coffee shop. We won 20 minutes. The Republican, no element of the campaign would answer me. And so I just had to go back to the Democrats. So you guys track him. Do you know where he's going to be? And he was going to show up for a event with Lee Zeldin, who's running for governor. Just Zeldin's bus was coming, and he was going to show up. And I showed up at that and introduced myself to his campaign person, and I wasn't like, hey, how dare you ignore me? I introduced myself to his campaign spokesman and the candidate turned out, gave me his cell phone number. And once I was physically there, the campaign person was like, "Oh yeah, we've been really busy." He was trying to avoid the media, but once I was there, really busy. And Mark Molinaro, the candidate, was told me about something that was happening in a day that I could go drive up to, and I did that. But I had to just show up and and pressure it. Things where I showed up and the campaign just said, "Actually, this is closed." That's another version of it. That's happened in Alabama with Roy Moore, especially because of the Post, and his campaign just started to stop letting the Post into things. And I generally would just show up anyway. Not if it's clear the candidate doesn't want to talk to me, I'm like, well, I just want to see what this is like. So I'm going to show up. I'll talk to people on the outskirts. I'll show up and not register as press and just hear what the speech was. I don't care. Worst thing that can happen is they kick me out of something that they want me to be, that they want me to not be in anyway. Then one where the candidate's like, we're going to talk to you. Oops, we decided not to. That happened a few times covering. Ted Cochran was running for re-election, senator from Mississippi. 11 years ago, and just was clearly too old and senile, and his campaign kept hiding it from us. Here's the event, but you can't talk to him. And that just became part of the story. And I was open with the campaign. Like, we will point out that we're talking to his opponent, not him, because we have the ability to explain this. And if we had a camera, we would have the camera on him. Like, they care less and less, Republicans especially, if the story is they wouldn't talk to anybody. And it's not like you're trying to hold that above their head like a sword. We're going to give you bad coverage. It's just if their strategy is we think it's great for us to ignore the media and go around you, then what can you do? I don't like it, but sometimes with those campaigns, he wasn't because he was senile, but there are other Republican campaigns that just don't want to talk to some media, and they go on podcasts or they go on X Spaces or whatever. And you just have to listen to that and use that and note in the story they didn't talk to me. Not ideal. I knew a bunch of people who did that for Brennan Herrera, whose name. He was running in a Republican primary for the House in Texas in 2024 and lost very narrowly. Just would not talk to mainstream media, but was always on these right-wing shows. And we just listened to the shows and said, okay, he said this. Like, what's his answer on this question? Luckily, the host asked him to ask that question. We just had to make our own. But if I find out where they are and they say, "Oh, it's not open press," I often just show up, and then if I get kicked out, whatever. Like, what are they going to do? Honestly, it's like is my thinking. Like, I think if they want a story about how they have a TRO on a reporter who showed up to an event, great, good story. I'm not worried about it. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Sibel. I cover national security for USA Today. I wanted to ask you about kind of the rise of like the Trump voter in politics and like what the impact of that has been. I feel like before or after this election, there was like a lot of soul searching among outlets who thought that there was this talk about, during the first Trump term, our coverage of Trump was kind of, people took issue with that. A lot of people, Americans, pushed back on that, and we need to think about how we cover this president. Is there anything that like you think was most fundamentally misunderstood about the Trump voter as this like force in politics, and what's your outlook on that now?
The Trump voter, I think there was too much of a sense from the media and from Democrats that there were a lot of people who voted for him as a last resort and wouldn't come back because once it wasn't Hillary that he was running against, they wouldn't. There was. I don't want to be too passive. I was skeptical because there was so much last minute. I just don't want Hillary being there. This guy will shake things up. Attitude that he had made so many mistakes up to 2020. I was a little surprised, and also it was hard to get a sense of enthusiasm because of COVID. I was surprised how many people said, no, we're all in, complete long haul. But I think overall, reporters are pretty good at showing up and talking to people. And the tell is always how angry liberal news consumers are when they just read a story about Trump voters somewhere who like what he's doing. They feel like we are, but I'm not trying to be too generic, but just somebody replying on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, or in the comments, angry that reporters went somewhere where they love Trump. It's like, do you not want to know this? Like, I think that the press has generally been pretty good at doing that. Not quite what you asked, but I do think the way reporters can write stuff that if the Trump voter reads it, they not you're catering to them. It's just not using anonymous sources who criticize him. Things that are from named sources. Get through this idea that there's this collusion happening between the press and between the deep state, et cetera, that is trying to make him look bad even when nothing's going that bad. And I always did that. I don't like using blind quotes. I don't like, this is a bad look, said one source close to whatever. But I found when I talk to Trump voters, if that's the story that I write, then not like I'm trying to make like a Trump voter friend every place I go, but then I'd find that person says, oh yes, I hate the media, but that was fair. You quoted me accurately. You quoted the Republican accurately. The stuff that they would say, this is why I don't trust the media, is, and sometimes unfair. I'd have people I would quote and then get angry that I quoted them accurately. But generally, things that are not, we're going to give narrative to somebody who won't use their own name. That was absolute repulsion for Trump voters. For covering them, I really do think the press has done a good job on it. I'll defend it all the time. Just there were not as many stories. People going out and like, hey, why do people still like Barack Obama? Why do they still like Joe Biden? There just weren't. Like, those weren't written. I think the sense in the press that currently the press is constituted of people with different educational experience, different political values than the average voter who is a non-college educated white guy, still by a little bit. The average voter still. I think everyone's figured that out. We need to have like a broad reach beyond our own social circle to understand people. And I mean, I find this as a reporter. If I talk to people who are more in academia or don't do that interaction, that's often what they ask me. It's like, how do you put up with that? What do you say when someone like believes a conspiracy theory? And I think, I don't know, like, just they have a different life experience, and I talk to them. That's what the job is. Yeah, I feel like everyone I know who covers this is good at that. I'm sorry if that was too rosy an answer to the question, but I feel like I always would defend this when I just don't see as much like. A lot of conservative media at this point is podcast stuff where they're talking to each other. I don't see them going out there and saying, "Why did you vote against Susan Crawford?" This is like I see more. It doesn't make sense that she won. Let's run a regression that shows that she didn't. I feel like we're the press that has replaced it is much less open to finding different opinions than like the press they hate so much. Yeah, not an unpopular opinion in this room, but thank you for letting me rant. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Haley Bullis with the Washington Examiner. Thank you for coming to speak with us today. Getting back to like the political side a little bit, we saw yesterday kind of a real rebuke of Trump's policy from Senate Republicans. As we're gearing up for this long term, do you expect to see more of that, or do you expect it to be very much a case by case basis?
Case by case, and I was saying a little bit at the top. It's just I think you have to cover every politician through their incentives, and what are Tom Tillis's incentives? Is it to be independent from Trump because he's worried about running re-election, or is it to avoid a primary challenge because he's betrayed Trump on something? What is Bill Cassidy's incentive? And this was the story with the RFK Jr. nomination. Is this incentive that they will deny like that he's worried about a primary challenge, but he's polling behind a primary challenger because he voted to convict Trump? So I don't know if that would grow. Being on the lookout for some Republican who decides to break from this is possible. I just think each person should be understood, and there's not that many in Congress. There's not that many on the ballot that are actually in trouble. What are we talking about? Who are running for re-election and are on the ballot in a competitive state. It's 5 in the Senate, 20 in the House, 25 in the House. Just understanding what each of them do. So do I expect more people to break? 180 Republicans, I would not expect to break on anything at all because of those incentives. If I'm in a plus 30 Trump seat. I just think of Bob Good in Virginia, who just didn't endorse Trump very quickly and said some nice things about DeSantis and lost his seat. The point of that is for everyone who might want to break from him to feel the same way. So I don't expect much of that. I am curious because I do think Vance is going to be the nominee the next time, that he's doing everything to set himself up that way. I am curious if there are some breaks on that. I don't think that's going to be a big story though for another year or so. Once it's like, do I want to campaign with somebody in my state who is the? You didn't ask this, but part of this, I do think it's already been interesting to ask Democrats what they think of their leadership. And I've been through very many versions of this. Like Republicans for years would say, I don't want Mitch McConnell as my leader, and then they'd vote for him. You've already seen some Senate candidates say they wouldn't vote for Schumer. Good thing to ask everybody. Would you vote for Schumer? Would you vote for Jeffries if you're with one of these candidates? If a Republican, would you vote for Johnson? They 100% they'll be happy to break with Johnson before they are with Trump. But that's an interesting way to see how they're thinking about like the structure and the credibility of their party. Because I don't know what would happen to turn Democrats' enthusiasm about their leadership around in a year. Like, they're not going to win many things. They're going to stop some stuff. But that question, I think, will lead to more interesting answers than, can you really support Trump on this thing? But it's always worth asking. Can we imagine the thing that Trump does that's so unpopular that Republicans are comfortable breaking? I can't yet. Maybe my imagination's not big enough. But I don't. I just keep looking at those primary results and saying, no, they would denounce Johnson, and they would denounce Hegseth, or they denounce somebody who seems weaker than him before they would denounce him.
Hi, I'm Katie Stanton. I'm a Capitol Hill reporter with Tax Notes. So obviously something I'm following really closely this year is the reconciliation package and possible, extensions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And something that I find really interesting is how much of that decision making is thinking about the midterms, when in reality, especially for this reconciliation package, it's a lot of tax extensions rather than tax cuts. So I guess from your perspective and experience, how do you see trying to measure how voters would receive messaging, seeing these as tax cuts versus actually seeing, for example, they may not see the impact of a tax package until they're doing their taxes in 2027.
Yeah.
Or, what politicians might be saying about what the tax package is doing versus how it actually impacts pay stubs. How do you try to measure that, especially in relation to the midterms and how it affects voting?
Well, on the rates, I don't think those, because they're invisible, you're not going to see much reaction to that. It's an interesting story the way Republicans are playing with the baseline in the Senate, but I think that's fascinating. But it's ironic because it's, for most people, it was a non-issue in the campaign. If you go back to how much Trump talked about it, occasionally they'd say Democrats want. You can always say Democrats want the largest tax increase in history, because in real terms, that's the most. Getting rid of these would be the largest tax increase in history. But they knew that wasn't one of their best issues, because just the average person who's making. It varies from state to state, but the average person is not in these brackets that where they're actually playing with it. They were not paying that much in income tax before. Before the 2017. They were not paying much after. Democrats actually did a pretty good job of making some of it toxic. So I think unless things are added, the stuff that Trump ran on that he didn't explain how he'd pay for, like the no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security benefits, that one's especially interesting because I think it sounds good, but a lot of people don't understand that most people with lower incomes are not ever going to pay the tax. That was a tax they put in place in 1982 to balance it, because they knew that some people could take the hit and some people couldn't. Those they would. I think that the degree to which people would notice those, the tips one they would notice, but it is only a yearly thing. But you're bringing up an issue, something where there definitely is a lot of not just lobbying, but ad spending and messaging in Washington to convince people that everyone cares about this. But there's not going to be, the way it would come up in the election next time is Republicans saying that Democrats want to raise taxes, but they can't because Trump will still be president. I don't think as a voting issue it's going to be super relevant until 2028, when the next Democrat's running, and these will have been extended, probably most of them. I don't know how this ends yet, and they'll be able to go back and say they want the largest tax increase in history. Josh Shapiro or Wes Moore, whoever wants that. I think that's interesting how they prep themselves over the next 3 years to do that. But I don't. Unless some of the new things Trump mentioned on the campaign trail happen, I don't think I'd be amazed if people are meeting and planning ads next summer and think this is one of their best issues. There's going to be far more Democrats want boys in your girls sports team ads than Democrats oppose the greatest tax extension in history. You didn't notice it. The invisibility problem in politics is real. Is immigration going to be as big an issue next year? Well, probably not, because when border crossings are down, people don't pay attention to it, and that's the catastrophe of success. This has happened to Trump before. They're way down. It stopped being an issue. He talks about it, and if there's not a caravan coming, people don't care. Same thing. If taxes it didn't change at all. You don't get a reward for saying, look how your taxes didn't go up. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being here. I'm Shrey with PBS NewsHour. You sort of hinted at this in the last answer you gave, but I just kind of wanted to talk about Democrats' heir apparent what is and isn't resonating in the voters you're speaking with at the moment right now when it comes to sort of the new faces or the faces that might be front in line to lead the Democratic Party? Gavin Newsom, folks like Alyssa Slotkin, Ruben Gallego, these sort of newer faces, and their attitudes towards those big social issues when it comes to trans people in sports, immigration, things like that. We've seen people like Gavin Newsom come out and try and break through the noise when it comes to those right-wing podcasts and talk about trans issues. And I'm curious to see whether that comes across as genuine to certain Democratic voters as a necessary strategy, or it becomes sort of trite and insincere.
Well, I haven't polled Democrats very much on what they think of Newsom. Overall, they think it is insincere because his record does not match what he's saying now. CNN, Andrew Kaczynski at CNN had a very good story about Newsom saying no Democrat I know uses Latinx, and he had as governor, because it was the lingua franca of how Democrats talk. Not all Democrats, but again the academics, the kind of people who donate, who come to Gavin Newsom fundraisers. He's not seen as sincere, and the overall way that Democrats see that issue, I find, is that it is a distraction. The norm that they had in place at the end of the Biden administration, which is protections, the acknowledgement of gender fluidity existing, which is not the Trump position. If we just got back that norm and chilled, we can talk about real issues. When this comes up at, for example, the Bernie and AOC rallies that I went to just the ones in Colorado. That's how it comes up, is that they're bringing this issue up to divide us because they want us to ignore that they're going to cut taxes for the rich, and they ignore that we're cutting food stamps, et cetera, et cetera. That is generally how I see it. The only politician I've seen be a little more aggressive who's in that mix is J.B. Pritzker. A little bit was more of just coming out and saying, no, I'm never going to give up on these people. I'm going to distinguish myself from the Democrat on the CNN panel who's saying we need to give ground, saying we're never going to give ground. But it's often that context. I'm not going to give ground because this is a distraction from real issues. Because that one, we could do a whole thing on it, because that's a complicated topic where a lot of Democrats agreed to a lot of positive rights and equal rights in a way where they didn't have to be pressured like they were on gay marriage, where they said, well, no, of course, we all support this, we all support gender identity, et cetera. And then the political risks became apparent here, everywhere, Europe, everywhere, only after those rights were in place. Oh, we've extended these rights, we've redefined gender, but now there's somebody who wants into this bathroom, and what do we do about that? I've not seen them answer that in an effective way, apart from, by effective way, I'm just saying, just talk about some edge case and say, we have a solution for this. With sports, I've seen it say, yes, the NCAA has this policy, we should just defer to them. That's been pretty effective for them, I think. But in terms of saying, how are we going to fight on it? General Democratic response has been, they want to talk about these issues, but we want to talk about economic populism. And that's Greg Casar, who's not running for anything, is the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, really emphasized this. He did a couple of interviews, but I talked to him this week about Elon stuff. And he emphasized again, we need to have a big tent where we're not saying you're not allowed in if you have the wrong position on social issues. And this is Sarah McBride's position. This is a number of those positions. We can deal with that later. we need to be a credible economic populist party. And then if we are, there are going to be a lot of people who deprioritize their disagreement with us on abortion or something. Because they agree with us on taxation, on welfare, on healthcare, et cetera. That's the mood. I've not seen a Democrat really swerve from that. I really just haven't seen, even what Newsom did, it's just, he didn't get, because the reason I was hesitating is because, if you could go on YouTube, you could download 100 million hours of people arguing this issue and just saying there should be no quarter. We must, what Trump is doing. We must completely erase these definitions and these rights out of the law completely. And I've not seen Democrats say, no, we shouldn't, here's how we fight back. They've said, all right, let's emphasize our popular ideas first. I mean, it is really early, but I am struck when they do that. Because I'd say no center-left party in the world has figured out how to navigate this conservative backlash on those issues. Not the first time it's happened. You go back to them dealing with liberal school, the end of school prayer in the 60s when the Supreme Court struck that down. like liberal textbooks in the 70s. Like this always happens that they say, "Gosh, we're losing on this one. Well, let's talk about something else."
You have time for one more, David?
I do. Yeah. I wondered.
Okay.
I mean, whoever wants to talk. Yeah.
Hi, Nicholas Anastasio from National Journal Hotline. I cover Senate campaigns for them. In your early career, whether it's talking with campaigns or talking with folks in states that maybe you're not as acquainted with, how are you able to sort of assert yourself and say, I need to talk to this candidate, I want to hear from them, or for the campaign to show some type of tangible evidence that their campaign is to be like taken seriously?
Oh yeah. Well, because you probably, I mean, I'm sure you know a lot. Just like you do have to see if they can actually raise money before there's any polling. What sort of support do they have? That how do I prove? How can they prove that this is a real campaign that has support? And I do think money is the most basic way to do that. I have even when I was covering not a Senate candidate but covering AOC in 2017, this wave of brand new Congress Justice Democrats. She wasn't raising no money. She was raising much less than Crowley. But this candidate with no connections is like putting together a real campaign. And when I show up and talk to them, there is a real campaign. In a case, because I'm worried about getting super specific because we've got like let's say like last cycle, Alyssa Slotkin's running, and then there's Hill Harper running as a progressive who's talking about healthcare and stuff. I didn't spend a lot of time covering that race, and it was because like he could raise some money and he could get some attention, but just talking to like. You could talk to Democrats in the state and know there was not really that interest. And I was also going with my gut that Democratic voters care about electability, not about any ideology. Right now, in 2024 too, like if given a choice between a candidate they agree 100% with and a candidate that they're convinced is more electable, a lot of them will go with a candidate they think is more electable. But that's his gut. How do you tell in a race, let's say, where I'm thinking of a couple examples. Michigan again, Mallory McMorrow's in, Haley Stevens might get in. How seriously should we take somebody who's like, I'm a rich person just getting into this race and I have no record? You start with just talking to them, like introducing yourself to your team, talking to them about the race, and coming back to them later. I think it's worth giving everybody a chance, unless it's like a clear stunt thing, which is rare. Like there's a candidate who's just running to get their name out in the media, and you can tell, like you talk to Democrats in the state and they've never heard of the person before, sometimes they can buy their way into Congress, like Sri Thanadar or something. But even with him, I talked to him when he was for governor. It's just like I always at least take the interview, and the worst thing that happens is here's 15 minutes, and I'm never going to write about it. I could tell this candidate wasn't super serious. Once you get to who should people be taking seriously in this race, that's like after a quarter of them raising money, I think, is the only way. If you're being like, I just haven't seen a candidate raise nothing and have no endorsements and blow past in the Democratic primary. In a Republican primary, everybody. Also, you have to take some people seriously. They don't have the resources because, for the time being, the plan is still become credible to Trump, get an interview with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, get him to tweet about you, and then you're credible. That's like Democrats don't have a shortcut like that available to them. Are we totally cut off? There's one more hand up.
Yeah,
okay.
right over here. Sure. I just wanted to respect your time.
No, I'm good. It's just there was some edit of a newsletter I think is fine, but I'll check my phone when we're done. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
Sure.
My question is like, we're kind of seeing, you talked about how J.D. Vance is
Sure.
kind of most likely be the nominee for 2028. I'm curious why you believe there's such this kind of consolidation among GOP, at least a lot of GOP senators saying like they believe Vance will be the nominee. I mean, the RNC announced last week that he'll be the chair of the finance committee. I'm curious, why you think there is this consolidation behind him.
Well, that's a good example. The RNC on paper is neutral in a primary unless there's an incumbent president. He's not. So by making him finance chair, that was Vance. And this is just like the story of Vance is that he just will take a risk, and they often work for him. He'll do something that might cause a backlash, but it has worked for him. Sometimes it doesn't. Hasn't failed for him yet. But there was no Republican saying, "How dare they do this? It's supposed to be an open primary." They didn't react that way. They're not treating him like he's the best candidate and he's a shoo-in if he's the nominee. They're not saying we need to make sure he's the nominee because they're worried about somebody else. And I'm thinking of even though Clinton lost, that was the attitude in 2013, 14 with Democrats, is we hope she runs because we're not sure that anyone else can do what she can do. But why are they not doing that? Yeah, I think it's, I was answering a little bit the last one. Just if you're Republican, unless there is some huge meltdown of Donald Trump's political support, it's a George Bush 2008 situation, then Trump will control. You can do everything you want, run against Trump, and he'll anoint somebody else, and they'll beat you. Nikki Haley has not been very relevant since she ran. No one's talking about her running. The other people that are in the mix are in the cabinet. So how would they do it, like a Marco Rubio? They haven't thought much about it. And I think even Democrats, I point this out when I say Trump third term nomination, third term talk is distraction. They just are not thinking about a post-Trump climate yet. I don't think they will until 2027 or right after the midterms, and they realize, there is an end date on this because it's what they've been. I mean, there's a whole generation of strategists that have only operated. I'm thinking of everyone I know from kind of Justice Democrats and those groups. They started with Bernie, but Trump was the driving force in that election, and that's just been the Republican Party they've known for 10 years. But that's why there is a philosophical debate about what the party should stand for. There are Republicans that we're talking about who don't. I do think that at this point, the Republicans who say one thing anonymously to the media and then one thing out loud, I just trust the thing they say out loud. I feel like they're saying what we want to hear. But are there Republicans who are, who would rather the party move in direction away from protectionism, and disagree with our approach to Russia? Are there any who say, and I can make that the basis of a campaign? Not really. I think there might be somebody. Let's say everything goes okay for Trump, and he's still got 75% support for Republicans in 2027. Would there be somebody who runs like a Joe Walsh-style campaign and says, I'm going to challenge him? Sure, but then they have the context of Trump not debating in 2024. Before that, the RNC just not letting any Republican, even on the ballot in some states, if they were challenging Trump. They just have seen Republicans be very comfortable in preventing competition, which they might extend to Vance. So those are the reasons. I haven't seen somebody. I think somebody might. The situation where they say, can we actually deal with this guy, is one where it's a political disaster and it's 2027 and Democrats had a great election and Vance is polling at like 35%. That's the climate. That was the climate in 1987. Republicans had a terrible midterm in 86. They lost the Senate. George H.W. Bush was not popular personally, like Reagan. Lots of, like Bob Dole, everyone piled in that race because they were like, yes, he's the heir apparent, but we can't possibly win with this guy. And they eventually did. But that will be they're not going to boldly go in with Trump as popular as he is right now. But I don't know. They're missing something, I think, because there is no argument in public about what Vance stands for, which is not what Vance stood for 6 years ago. I mean, even on tariffs, it was not what he stood for. He went from tariffs are a bad idea because the hollowing out of the Midwest that I've seen is not reversible with tariffs to, yes, it is. You could theoretically argue with that, but the arguing is being done by bulwark writers, which I'm not saying, but I think they're doing a great job doing it. Like, it's Jonathan Last and it's like Charlie Sykes. It's not a Republican saying this is a bad idea.
Probably have to end it there, but I get this feeling that when David is not offering his knowledge, that he is constantly on the phone or on a plane somewhere. But we're lucky to have you here, and I know you'll be back, hopefully, with the next class. But thanks so much. Please
thank you.
Offer your thanks.
I appreciate it.